Hello and welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast. I am Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert, recognized amongst LinkedIn's 15 innovative influencers to follow and honored as the RevTech strategist of 2024. Proudly listed number 9 of 43 must listen to podcasts for every sales professional. The Scale Your Sales podcast is your go-to resource of actionable insights and proven strategies to inspire and help revenue-focused leaders, CEOs, CROs, and sales leaders to achieve sustainable growth. In today's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast, my guest talks about customer success and how this is becoming the greater portion of a revenue source and revenue growth. And so how important it is to know your numbers. We talked about buyer centricity doesn't stop with the sale, but it drives sustainable growth through the relationships that you build. We also talked about change management being an important aspect of customer success. So this was quite an unusual perspective on what customer success is and what they do and how they deliver it. My next guest is a two-time Chief Revenue Officer with over 15 years of global leadership experience in technology. She specializes in building and scaling high-performing customer-facing teams, aligning across functional initiatives and driving revenue growth through customer success. A passionate advocate of diversity and actively coaching and mentoring women in tech. Please welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast, Elizabeth Blass.
Hello, thank you for having me. So happy to be here.
Oh, I cannot wait to get into this conversation with you, Elizabeth. I'm really keen to understand your perspective in terms of breaking down silos and how you kind of align and prioritize revenue teams and revenue growth.
I love this topic so much, Janice. I especially feel like it's topical right now because for a lot of companies, they've just gone through or are going through beginning of the year kickoffs. And so I think, working across silos and collaborating with different organizations, it really can be, most problems can be addressed by laddering up to the goal. Reminding what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve here? They're the same goals, right? Especially for ELTs. You sat in meetings, you worked through strategy sessions, probably in Q4 of last year. And so I think when a lot of these hiccups happen, you can usually tie it back to alignment. And so this time of year, it should be the easiest time to get people really aligned, right? Because you've just done all of those kickoffs and you have the slides, you have your corporate objectives that are that have been rolled out and are top of mind for everyone. But it really does ladder up to, right, the goals that you've all just worked to set.
So then you get to the middle of the year and it's getting, those lines are beginning to blur, aren't they? People are going off cock, they're getting more desperate, or people are having, an easy time, they're lucked in, but everyone's going off slightly off topic. So how do you maintain the momentum and the freshness that you had at the beginning of the year?
Yeah. Well, and I will say, Janice, that just because I said everyone should be aligned because of the kickoffs, it doesn't mean they are. I don't think you even have to wait until the middle of the year for things to I can't what term you just used, but I think it can start earlier than that, because think about what happens. You roll out, you all agree, you get excited about the most important initiatives, and then things happen. You may get an upset customer. On the positive side, maybe you get a team member that has a brilliant idea of a new way of doing things. And so you think about these things that pop up within all of the different teams, and you can just slowly start getting a little bit further, all well-intentioned, but a little bit further from that alignment or from those goals. And so I think, where do we want to start here? There's so many things you can do. One, I think at the leadership level, even first level down leadership, having sync up meetings with the, across the sales leaders and marketing leaders and CS leaders, et cetera, kind of across all of the leaders that manage the customer journey, doing check-in meetings to just share what's going on and how that impacts the goals that you're all working towards. That can be really helpful. And I know, people will hear that and think, oh gosh, another meeting. But we added this meeting, for example, in the last year, just because we felt like we weren't always on the same page with changes that were happening and maybe the reasons why. And so I think quick sync meetings like that can be really beneficial across department.
So how often do you have these quick sync meetings to ensure that everyone's aligned to the same goal and the same purpose?
We do those check-in meetings every other week, and sometimes they're quick. If we feel like we've had a lot of communication and we know what's going on, then we cruise through the updates really quickly. But there's usually something or just a question that someone has that is really beneficial for the whole group to hear. So it's just a nice touch base, I think, to keep people connected and informed. I think even with the ELT, I've worked with different companies, and I think even though you work really hard to set those initiatives, I think the one-on-one conversations can be really useful as well, just because everyone gets so busy, and as you ladder up the goals, like everyone is kind of off working with their organization and working to achieve those goals, and so. If you don't come back together and kind of have those one-on-one conversations about how it's going, I think you can kind of fall out of alignment there as well.
So how does this work with revenue ops? Because revenue ops is supposed to centralize all the operations, all the data, and surely that's got to be centralized under the one goal. So you've got sales, you've got marketing, you've got customer success. But, like all of the operational side of that, surely that is to achieve the goal and the objective.
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is an interesting one, and I want to hear your thoughts on this as we go through too, just because so many different companies have a different approach. I mean, I think the best thing, one, right? I keep talking about the goals and making sure you're aligned on the goals. The visibility of like across department on how we're doing against those goals is really important. And so if you talk about revenue operations, regardless of where that lives, I mean, I've been in some companies where it's a spreadsheet, it's a shared Google sheet, and you go to see how people are doing. And don't knock the spreadsheet. I think if it provides that visibility and if it's accurate, then great, that can help to align people. But having the visibility, and not just the visibility of the actual, if you're talking, expansion, churn, contraction, new sales, not just the outcome or the lagging indicator, but also having visibility across the leading indicators that you're managing to as well. I think, again, regardless of how you're seeing that, if you have a fancy dashboard, that's awesome too. But however you have to get there, I think that visibility is really key.
So what's the role of the C-suite and leadership in this? I mean, I always see revenue as core engine to all operations, all business. But I'm biased. I'm on the revenue side, so that's why I think it's more important, the most important aspect. So who has the ultimate decision as to the objectives and the goals, and how out of alignment and how happy they are about the variance? Who has the ultimate decision making with that, or responsibility?
So I'm trying to think of Dave Jackson. Do you know Dave? Dave Jackson said in one of his speeches last year, he's in London, you should know him, Janice. He had said, he was kind of speaking to different department leaders. And he said, you are not just a department leader, you are co-CEO. And so as an answer to your question, I think every ELT member is responsible for the number, the alignment, the collaboration. I can take my job, I'm a chief customer officer, and my primary job is to make sure that I'm, kind of solving for the customer journey across all silos and collaborating with my peers in every other department to make sure that any barriers are well known and we can work together to get across those barriers or get through them. That what is working well is well communicated so we can double down on those things. It's my responsibility to make sure that I'm pulling together cross-functionally all of those departments. But I would hope that if you talk to any member of the ELT, the CFO would say the same. It's that person's job to make sure they understand the needs of whether it's reporting or budgets or the financial targets across all of those departments. So I hope, Janice, that every kind of executive, every C-suite would give that answer, because we have that responsibility across the leadership team first, that whole kind of team one. That I think it's Patrick Lencioni who kind of wrote about that, the team one, or that first team objective. And then as the C-suite, you obviously have responsibility for carrying that message through and, inspiring and accountability and all of that with your own organization. But I would hope every C-suite would give that answer.
So I'm really interested in your view, not just internally with your organization, but kind of globally in terms of how you think that the customer-led objective, business objective, how you think that that is across most organizations, how, what's the word? I mean, how front of mind is it generally across organization, and compare the difference within what you do and how you're leading it, just so that we get a bit of perspective.
I think it's different. So let me kind of categorize this. I think, I think it's much easier to lead customer centricity and have those customer value conversations if you are fortunate to work in a company where your product actually fuels your customers' growth. And I differentiate that from a company where you may have a product where it's I guess categorize it as kind of a nice to have. That's a really hard place to be. And so I look at by the way, especially in this day and age, it's a hard place to be, when you're talking retention and expansion and all of those things. But if you are working for a company where the product fuels your customers' growth, everything should be built around what that looks like. Why, right? What is the need? What is that customer's goal? How do you help them to achieve that goal through your solution? And then how do you make sure that they continually are getting that value? If you're in lockstep with what their goal is, then you can build a whole plan around that. If they're achieving it, if you're achieving it, your product is helping them to get there. And if that's really well understood, that's across sales and the way they're selling it. It's across customer success and the way that they're getting them through that customer journey and expanding and retaining and all of the things. It's your product team understanding it. It can kind of go on and on from there. But I think that's always my preferred place to be, is to be in a product that's actually fueling the growth of your customers, right? That's the most exciting place to be.
I think this is a really interesting subject, Elizabeth, because even the commodity products, the nice to have products, there's a certain belief that this is important to the customer. The salesperson goes in, this is important, this will fuel, this is going to answer all of your questions and all of that. And they're building a case on that. But actually, okay, so many products that are promoted as such are not. They don't fuel growth, and it isn't really measurable, and it's just imagined. So I think this is a really interesting concept to actually ask yourself internally, really, how much is this feeding the bottom line? And when we're doing the value proposition, so much of the the value can be made up, can be imagined, can be quantified, but it's not real. It's imagined. So I wonder how much, and this is what kind of being customer centric, being buyer centric is all about, being really focused on the customer and really how much you're benefiting them, and being able to quantify and qualify that. So what is the difference between when it is real and when it's imagined? Because that's what all of our sales leaders are telling us, that this is real even when it's not.
Sure, I know. This is where I think too that being in, new sales or client acquisition or whatever you call it, I've not been in that world. I have supported and worked with sales teams my entire career and have a great respect for that work. But I think, my gosh, it's a lot harder. And you're right, it's you can have a wonderful message and value prop, and whether that's, think of through all the sales methodologies, of which there are many. I think that even if it is, a nice to have product, that doesn't mean that no one wants to buy it. There are, if budgets allow, and if it makes something easier, that there's, you can derive value. I just think that if it is truly fueling, like the way it's the way that a company is running their business on your product, it's solving a real problem or saving them money, or something like that is one, I think, a bit more inspiring for people to work on. I mean, maybe some people just like the forever challenge of, how many people can I, sell this to and keep them using it? It is so much work. That's why I think I kind of categorize it that way. I think it's personally so much more fun to work on a product that fuels growth.
And I think it really made me think it's a great category to kind of measure by. I mean, now we're in a world where you've got to justify everything. Plus, the sales cycle is longer, and there has got to be return on investment, and buyers are not so susceptible as they used to be. So I think a lot of that's changing. But it really did make me think about the value that's real and the ones that's imagined. And I think that you've got a great benchmark for that. So, how would you measure this? Talking about integrating kind of bias and customer centricity into the sales strategy, what mechanisms do you use to measure it? And you talked about some of them that are leading and lagging indicators. So, talk to us about, what you use to kind of measure the impact.
Yeah. And I think that balance is really important. And we all say this, right? Activity doesn't necessarily equal outcome, but I do think that there are certain activities, particularly in the customer success space, if you're going through a lot of change. We've been talking about this for years, about how customer success teams are now managing revenue. And I don't have the current percentages, but I would have to imagine that's got to be at or above 90% by now. The last few holdouts are headed there, or else probably. And so I think that as those teams are kind of learning new skills and approaches, there are some activities that are definitely leading, that are likely worth measuring. And I think also, just in terms of true leading indicators, I think there are a lot, depending on your product, there are a lot of usage-based metrics, not just in the sense of what does good look like, per segment, what do we expect to see customers using, but also just where there are changes up or down in the usage. Up is great, but what's the reason for it? Is it a short term? Is it a long term? Just really understanding your customer. And then, of course, in the other direction, if you see, a small decline in usage that isn't, seasonal, or, holidays, or who knows, right? What you expect with your usage, but just really knowing what those trends look like can tell you a lot about what's going on with your customers. And I think being the other area that I've seen a lot of growth in with customer success teams is knowing their customer, but just knowing their kind of book of business, what's going on with their customers, and who are the decision makers that are leaving, what acquisitions are happening, like really staying on the cusp of some of those changes, I think can get ahead of later retention issues as well. I think balancing those. And I do, by the way, I think that there's a lot we can learn from our sales friends and the way that they know exactly which numbers to lean into and measure and take action on. I think sales is, they've been doing this longer in a sense, and I just think there's a lot of rigor in the way that sales team manage to numbers, leading and lagging, that we in the CS world can still learn quite a bit from.
I'm curious, within your organization, how are you structured in terms of the marketing, the sales, and the customer success? What does that look like?
So we have a marketing executive who leads the marketing team. We have a sales executive that is responsible for client acquisition. And then in my chief customer officer role, I have the implementation teams, customer success, support, customer education. And what else did you ask about, Janice? That's and then we each roll up to the CEO.
Yeah, so and then, because I think it's quite fascinating, customer success, your area is now sounding, because you mentioned about 90% of revenue can be coming from that side, whereas previously we often looked at the sales acquisition being, as much as we know, retention, the profits are all in retention, and the way that a lot of even traditional businesses, like non-SaaS businesses, is moving to ensure that more of their revenue is in the retention, is in acceleration, is kind of more drip fed than kind of front loaded. But it's really interesting how the customer success has grown so quickly over a short space of time to actually be most valuable aspect of the revenue operation to the whole company.
Yeah, I think the split, I think the split varies in terms of, for companies,
Products,
how much is coming in from client acquisition versus customer success. But I just think more and more these days, customer success is carrying a number and has a responsibility for revenue where they didn't even a couple of years ago. And I think it's definitely, it's one thing. I think for the first year and a half, you're talking about customer success needs to embrace it. And that I definitely am seeing. I mean, it's you could look at the numbers and understand that your existing customers are a great source of, growth opportunity. But I also think with the customer success teams, it's more than just embracing it. It's equipping them to really make sure that they know how to have the conversations and ask sometimes the tough questions, and to really make sure that they're prepared, I think, for those conversations.
And talking about making sure they're prepared, change management is an important aspect, isn't it?
It is everything. With any software, whether it's like we talked about, whether it's the nice to have software or something really business critical, change management is hard. You and I were talking about just how busy our lives are right now. I mean, our customers, life is busy. There are so many competing priorities, and no one starts their day, their month, their year thinking, I can't wait to, well, maybe somebody does, but I can't wait to learn this new software. I can't wait to implement this new software, right? It's another thing to do, even if it's going to help you. It's work to get something like that implemented. So I have a lot of respect and empathy for customers who are embarking on, changing any kind of software, even if they know they'll be better for it.
I would imagine one of the indicators is usage, isn't it? If a customer is not utilizing it up to a certain level, then they're likely to churn. And so you're going to have resistance from them changing from what they used to do to what they now need to do. And maybe the software, there's new things to learn, so hence the change management. But there's an imperative to actually get them over that curve. Otherwise, the deal's going to be churned.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was with a team once that when I had come in, the product leader asked, about the different measurements we were using in customer success around usage, and if they were aligned, going back to alignment, if they were aligned with what the product managers believed success looked like. And I was new at the time and said, well, I would hope that they're the same. I don't know why we would be viewing, different metrics. And it came out that we really were using different metrics. And it was through a series of conversations where we really had to sit down and look at what does good look like across maturity, across different segments, and really make sure that what the product team believed that, how the product was going to be used and the different milestones, that the customer success team understood that. And then they were able to implement kind of those success metrics that were very much aligned. But before then, they hadn't been. And that makes a big difference in terms of, again, understanding what is happening with the customer usage, but also kind of matching that back to what was the expectation. And if we're falling short, let's work together to figure out what maybe needs to change in the product, or with the measurement if we're wrong about what the expectation was. And so having that alignment was really, really helpful in terms of really measuring what our customers were using or not.
It sounds to me so much of your role is around collaboration, negotiation, just internally, let
Yes.
alone what you do externally with the customer. Would you say that that's the case? That's a key skill that you have to learn?
Absolutely. And I love talking to people, and I think relationships are important in any role. But I think even when you think you're communicating, with your team and with your peers, it's almost never enough. I think, again, just because of the cycle of information and the amount of work that everyone is doing, um, if you start to assume different things rather than talking to the person, I feel like that fuels the alignment problems as well. And so I think those relationships and the communication across the different departments is so key. And I don't know if it's because we're in most cases we're so much more remote, or if it's just the speed of information is so much faster. But I feel like I can have a conversation one week and feel pretty good about the alignment, and then just with a lot of things, maybe changing of a conversation the next week, and I'm like, how did this happen? We just talked about this, or or maybe I wasn't clear, or I didn't go into enough detail for you to really understand the why. And so I think the communication, the talking, and the listening, and the asking questions, it never ends, because the communication, and the collaboration is probably the majority of what I do.
So, what advice would you give a CEO or other revenue leaders in creating a roadmap for revenue growth in 2025 into 2026? What are the key elements?
Especially for the chief customer officers or CS people, I would say know your numbers and learn your numbers inside and out. And if there are numbers that you think that you need that you don't have, go find them or learn how to create them from what you have. I think, everything that you do will build onto knowing your numbers. It's every conversation that you have with your peers, bringing it back to, again, the targets, not just the financial targets and the goals, but if there's nothing else that you do to set yourself up for success this year, I think it's starting there. And then to make sure you have visibility across of the numbers that matter to the goals that you've set. Those are probably the two biggest areas I think that require focus. And it's not easy. So I won't pile on a bunch of other things, Janice, because I think you just do those two things, that will take some time.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to change it up a little bit and ask you, Elizabeth, who is your hero or shero?
Oh gosh, I love this question. I listen to your podcast, Janice. This is my favorite part of it. My shero is Kim Scott. And you probably know her from her book, Radical Candor. She has a new book that came out last year called Radical Respect, and highly recommend. It's never been more relevant. But I just love the idea of matching kindness with direct feedback, and just the reality that leadership does have a personal touch to it, and that you cannot avoid difficult conversations or do so at your own peril. So I would say, Kim Scott, I'm such a super fan of hers.
That's really interesting. I listened to you. There's a podcast of you, which is brilliant. I listened to that with Kim Scott, and and I will tell. In fact, I'll put the link in when this is published. People to go and listen to your story around that, because it's really interesting, the insights that come out. And yeah, I've read the book Radical Candor, and it really does kind of make you think about the way that we communicate. What we think we're saying and what someone else is hearing is two completely different things, but it's easily done. So love that.
And do you know, Janice, that was my first podcast. So,
really?
Go big or go home.
Which is brilliant. So, Elizabeth, how can listeners get hold of you?
Probably the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I do a rom-com series every once in a while with customer success, leadership lessons, or something related to customer success. So I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit.
And oh my gosh, I laugh so hard when I when I read your rom-coms. Dear listener, they're absolutely fantastic. Your humor comes out, and I absolutely love it. So
thank you.
I know that these things, they take a lot to produce. I've just done a kind of personal series, but it's so much fun for the audience. So I really do love your content.
Thank you. We have to have a little fun.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience, Elizabeth. I'm so glad I managed to secure you on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you in London and then in Chicago this year.
I can't wait. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Janice. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. If you enjoy this episode of Scale Your Sales podcast, explore other episodes of insightful guest conversations or watch the caption show on YouTube. Remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode filled with strategies to help you scale your sales. I love to hear your thoughts, so please share your views and leave a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more revenue generators just like you. So until next time, keep scaling your sales.